Hello, this is Mr. Smith with the honors lecture. This goes with the second unit on public sector economics. And today I want to talk about the three major economic problems that exist within all countries, but we're going to focus on the United States over the next 2 days. The three economic problems I want to discuss are unemployment, inflation, and poverty. First of all, unemployment. Unemployment seems pretty simple. These people don't have jobs, they're unemployed. They make up a certain percentage of the population, but it's actually a lot more complex than that. First of all, when we calculate the unemployment, we have to look at the total number of people that are looking for jobs but are not finding any out of the total amount of people in the labor force. So let's start with the labor force. Who's included in that? That's included with everybody above the age of 16 that is not retired, that is not institutionalized, that is not in the military. So if you aren't in those groups of people, then you are considered part of the labor force. So if you are above 16, healthy, you're not institutionalized, you're not in the military, you're a part of the labor force. Then to be unemployed, that includes people who are able to work and willing to work and have looked for work within the past 30 days, the past 4 weeks, a month. If someone stops looking for work, then they are no longer included in the unemployment figures. They're not searching the unemployment office's website. They're not actually going out there and posting resumes. They're not doing any of the activity that goes along with being unemployed and looking for work, so they're no longer included in the unemployment numbers. So only people who have looked within the last 4 weeks. And so that's not going to include people that are without jobs, that are waiting to go back to them, or waiting to start them, or on strike because they're part of the union, or they're on sick leave, or some other type of circumstance. Those people are not looking for jobs, so they are still considered part of the labor force, but they, depending upon their situation, might even be included as employed at that time. So we're just talking about the people who are without work, who are willing and able, and have looked within the last 30 days. And that is divided into the total labor force, which doesn't include all adults, as I mentioned earlier. And that's how we get the unemployment rate. That is calculated nationally. It's also calculated usually by state. It can be calculated by county. And that's because really the network of unemployment offices that exists throughout the United States. The reasons why people are unemployed, even in a healthy economy, we have at least 3 groups of unemployed people. The 3 that I'm going to mention specifically are actually would be 4. There are 3 types of natural unemployment that I want to mention as the most significant, and then the unnatural type of unemployment. The 3 natural type of unemployments that exist are all on the supply side of the spectrum. So remember that in the labor force, we are the suppliers of labor. So we are like businesses in most other marketplaces. In most other marketplaces, it's businesses that sell things and produce things. But in our case, we are the business. We are selling our labor to a customer. And the customer are factories and shops and schools and police forces and all those other organizations. They are purchasing our labor. And so the first ones I'll mention, these ones are influenced by our behavior, the suppliers. Now, there are three major ones in particular, but I'll mention a couple others too. The 3 major ones include frictional unemployment. This is when people leave one job to find another. They're going back and forth. That's why it's called frictional. Then there's structural unemployment, and that is when the skills don't match the jobs available. And so that person might have to move, relocate to find the jobs that match their training and education. So that is another type of natural unemployment. And the third major one that I'll mention before I mention a couple of the other types would be seasonal unemployment. And that is pretty self-explanatory. There are certain types of jobs where you're going to get laid off perhaps, and This happens because you choose to work in an industry that maybe has a low point during the year. So perhaps you're interested in working, for instance, in the farming industry, and you want to sell your labor for picking crops that can't be handled by a machine, and so you're only going to be involved in certain times of the year, not obviously during the winter, or you're going to have to move or relocate. So seasonal unemployment. So there will be less work in the off season. So frictional, structural, and seasonal are all natural types of unemployment. A couple other ones. Voluntary is when people choose to stay unemployed, and these typically are included in the unemployment rate after 30 days and they stop looking for work. They're also sometimes called discouraged workers. There's geographic unemployment, which means that people are not able to sell their labor because of the place that they're living or choosing to look for work. There isn't enough available, and so they need to shift their supply somewhere else. There's also real wage unemployment, is when the wages are above the equilibrium, which is causing more people to come out and supply their labor. So maybe a factory is paying $5 more than a minimum wage, and so a lot more people are going to be offering to supply their labor, which creates a surplus in the market, which causes unemployment. But these are all types of supply-side related unemployments and considered natural unemployment. So they occur naturally in the economy. Sometimes they fix themselves. For instance, real wage unemployment. Whenever there's a surplus, you then have a surge, then the employer doesn't have to offer as much money, and so then they lower their wages, and so you don't have as many people coming out to look for work or supplying their labor, and so the unemployment rate goes down. They shift their attention elsewhere. So these often happen, and they're important because whenever we have a new business or one that's expanding, we need to get employees from somewhere. And so we're going to hire the people that are in between jobs, leaving one job to find another. They're frictionally unemployed. We have some kind of office worker and we need to expand and hire more of them. And we typically had just been drawing a labor pool of people for manual labor, for instance, on our factory floor. And so now we need some office employees. And so we can go out and we can hire the structurally unemployed people because they had an education for it and they hadn't been able to find work. They really weren't matched for the working on the factory floor. And so now we can hire them to work in the office. So we can give examples for each of these, but basically they are the pool from which we draw people from. And typically it's 4 to 6% of the workforce. It falls within one of these natural types of unemployment. And that is necessary in order to make sure that we have a pool of people to hire from. Then there's the unnatural, the demand deficient or cyclical unemployment. And this happens because of an economic slowdown, a downturn in the economy. The business cycle is contracting. And not only that, but it's visible, especially when it becomes visible in the media and the word recession is tossed around, then businesses become afraid, producer expectations fall, they slow down production, they figure, well, we have too much in inventory already, we don't want to be stuck with a lot on our hands, and so maybe they don't start this new night shift, or maybe they shut down the night shift. Maybe they don't hire these new employees, or maybe they even lay off a few, and so they become pessimistic, maybe even if their profits are still going up. And this causes unemployment to go up. And with all these people unemployed, they're buying less, and so less needs to be made, and so more people get unemployed. And so in a really bad situation, going to turn into a snowball effect. Basically, we're going downhill. It just picks up size and momentum, and you end up with more and more unemployed people. So that is one of the three major economic problems. Unemployment, when it goes too low, when it drops below 4%, and lots of people have jobs, and lots of people are buying things, driving up demand, driving up prices, when money is moving quickly through the economy. And so the velocity of money, the quantity of money being used, all of that causes prices to go up. And so eventually when you have low unemployment, you have inflation, especially when it goes below 4%, because now you don't have as big of a pool of people to draw from if you want to start a new business or expand your business. And so now you have to raise wages and you have to hire more people. through basically stealing them away from other companies, other employers. And so when you raise your wages and offer better benefits, you then have to charge more for your products, and this in turn causes a rise in prices. So low unemployment eventually leads to inflation. And this is part of the invisible hand, because low unemployment is eventually corrected by inflation. Inflation goes up, prices rise, then producers become more scared about what future choices to make. And so they slow down production, and so then unemployment starts to go up. And so once unemployment gets to such a high point that you have prices low enough that people can afford to buy more, the producers will say, hey, costs are way down, let's buy more. And so then that eventually causes economic productivity increase, and then unemployment starts to drop again, and then inflation starts to go up again. It's like this seesaw effect. Inflation would be the rate of rising prices, and that is measured by the Consumer Price Index. Now, what happens is that a basket of goods, usually from the early 1980s, is taken right after the last time we had high inflation rates. A basket of goods that the average household uses is basically listed and kept track of over the years, and you are comparing how much the prices have gone up from the previous year. And the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, is the most common way that's reported in the news, for instance, about the rate of inflation. And there are three different types of inflation. There's creeping inflation, which is 0 to 3%. It is the best kind because it means prices aren't going up that much. Your money's going to be worth almost as much as it was the year before. Hopefully, wages are going up by more than this, 3% or greater. And so that's staying above the rate of inflation. So that way people's real earnings aren't going down. And then it makes it easier to budget because now you can make better predictions about the future. Chronic inflation, when it's above 3%, makes it more difficult for you to do any of those things. It means that your savings are being eaten away at, that your wages are probably less likely to keep up with rising prices, and so the amount of money you're making is going down, even though it looks the same on paper, because you're not able to buy as much as you were in the past. And it makes it more difficult to budget because prices could be 4%, they could be 10%, or somewhere in between. How much do we budget for next year for office supplies and for insurance and other types of things? It makes it more difficult to tell. And of course, there's hyperinflation. This is when prices rising reaches hundreds of percents per month, maybe even. And that is usually due to the quantity theory of money, that when governments, of course, produce too much money, it causes the money to be devalued, and so you need more of it to buy things, and so prices go up. Typically, when a government does this, if they are printing way too much money, then it is going to lead to the collapse of their monetary system and perhaps even their economy. A couple of the instances where this has occurred throughout American history would be in the South. The Confederacy overprinted money, causing dramatic inflation, causing their Confederate dollars to become worthless. The Weimar Republic in Germany, in between World Wars I and II, when the government printed lots of marks in order to pay off the war debt, the reparations from World War I. And in more modern times, Zimbabwe, when the government decided to seize farms and turn it over to political allies who didn't know a lot about farming, turning Zimbabwe from a bread basket, a producer of bread, for instance, into a major recipient of food aid almost overnight. This meant that the government had to spend more and more money to help make ends meet, and so they were printing money in order to do that, and it caused their currency to become worthless pretty quickly. They started printing billion-dollar bills and trillion-dollar bills and so on. So it will destroy everything. You basically have to get rid of your old money system in order to start anew. The other causes of inflation besides quantity would be demand pull, which is that when more goods and services are being demanded, it's going to drive up prices. Like more and more people arriving at an auction is going to drive up prices. Cost push is when the cost of production, the ingredients needed for manufacturing, for instance, if those go up, then they're going to have to pass along those costs to consumers. And then there's the wage the wage theory that when employees get paid more and more and more because unemployment is low, that also drives up inflation. The last of the three major economic problems that I'll mention would be poverty. And poverty is something that has persisted, and modern welfare programs have helped it drop to around 15% in bad times and 10% in good times. But it hasn't gone much lower than that. And the question is, can we get rid of it? There will always be failure in a capitalist system. There are winners and there are losers. Economies change, technologies improve, tastes change, resources are reallocated. So there's always going to be people that lose out. There's going to be people that fail, and there's going to be people that are impoverished. The poverty rate is determined by the minimum amount needed to sustain the average household. And so obviously this goes up with inflation, and it's a national number. So in some respects it doesn't make sense. For instance, for a single person, that might be around $12,000. But that obviously isn't enough to survive in Manhattan or Silicon Valley in California. And so it obviously is going to be a different number in different places. The poverty rate then is the percentage of people that are existing below that poverty line or threshold. This number is, of course, higher. The amount of money needed is higher for each person additionally in your household. But the groups of people that, statistically speaking, are more likely to be impoverished include most ethnic minorities. The only group that wouldn't be included out would be Asian Americans. It also includes single female heads of household. It also includes people in isolated rural areas or inner city urban areas due to lack of resources and jobs available. Rural areas is because of lack of transportation. Typically, when we say isolated rural areas, that would be someone beyond 30 minutes from an interstate, for instance. Causes of poverty include lack of education, would be one, lack of inheritance. Another would be inequality. Legally, of course, or de jure, inequality is no longer in existence. It's illegal for governments, especially, to discriminate. But obviously, de facto, discrimination still occurs as a matter of fact. The other causes include geography, which I already mentioned, and economic downturns. Whenever there is a contraction or recession, poverty rates typically go up considerably. And another one would be family structure. Two incomes are going to bring in more money than one, obviously. So for single people, especially single women, are more likely to be impoverished, and that's just because of numbers. It's just because of math. So all of these reasons create a poverty rate in a wealthy industrialized country like the United States with robust welfare programs that still causes poverty to be between 10 and 15%. And the question is, do we get it to go lower? And if so, how? And exactly why should we do that? But we'll talk more about all of those in the economic solutions lesson tomorrow.